So what we've done in previous episodes, as Dave said, is I've talked about valuation, that there are 4 different types of value: market value, valuing for insurance purposes, valuing for mortgage purposes, and valuing for rating and taxing purposes. Then we looked at valuing using comparable sales. But today I'm going to get down to valuing using units of measurement, because many times people want to know a figure. They don't want to know that it's like the property's worth between 750 and 800. They need a figure. In particular, the bank needs a figure, or if there is a marital dispute or some other sort of family settlement, most valuers need a figure. So I'll show you how you can come up with one figure. So here we have what we would call in South Australia a symmetrical cottage. I think in Victoria they call them a double fronted cottage. So let's just imagine that we have this house, and it is exactly the same house is in seven different positions on 3 different streets. So you'll notice my creativity, Cate and Dave. I've got OK Street, Good Street, and Great Street.
I love it. I'm using this.
Yeah.
All right. So we've got basically the same house on 3 different streets. So OK Street, as the name suggests, is only just OK, and Great Street is the best street. Next column, I've got sale dates and sale prices. Next column is where we start with the ratings. So the ratings are basically the comparable properties are either the same, worse, better, much worse, or much better than the subject property. So the subject property is the property that we are trying to value. So you look at, I mean, it's very hard for me to say it if you're not looking at the video, but I'll try my best. So if you look at the table, you'll see lots of worse, same, much better, much worse. So, and what I've done is looked at the major criteria when a valuer is looking to value a property. So number 1 is location, then is the size of the land. The next column is the size of the house. The next column is the condition of the house. And then there's another column titled other. And here we might put in if there's development potential, or it's got a view, or there's been some recent renovations. And then finally, the last column is overall. So when we take into consideration all of those factors, do we think overall the comparable property is the same, worse, better, much worse than the subject property? So if we have a look at 22 OK Street, so it was sold for $600,000 in 2021. Its location is worse because our property is on 29 Good Street. So it's not on the best street, but it's in between. So 22 OK Street is worse location than 29 Good Street. Land size is worse because 22 OK Street's only 500 square meters. Ours is 600 square meters. The house size is the same because they're both 3-bedroom, 1-bath properties. The house condition is much worse. So 22 OK Street is in a much worse condition than our property. No others to note. So overall, because what I've got is 2 ratings that are worse and 1 is much worse, overall, I would consider it as worse. So in simple English, in theory, that means that the subject property should be worth more than $600,000. All right. Now, I'm not going to go through all of them because you can have a look at it and you can stop the video and have a closer look. But I just want to point out 2 things. The first thing I would like to do, because I've got 7 of them, is I'm going to try and weed out some of them. So which are not comparable. So the first one is pretty easy. It's 28 Great Street because it's on a better street. It's a bigger block of land. It's a bigger house in much better condition, fully renovated and extended. So overall, it's much better. So straight away, I'm not going to use that one. And the other one I'm not going to use, you'll have to look closely, is 27 Good Street because it sold in March last year. So that sale is too old. So already I've gone down from 7 comparables to 5 comparables. The next step is I'm looking for which are the most comparable. So I've gone from one extreme to get rid of the ones that aren't comparable. And now I'm looking for the most comparable. So before I do that, Cate and Dave, did you have any questions?
Oh, this is fantastic. I'm loving seeing how it's laid out.
Okay. All right.
No, makes total sense.
All right. So what I do to make it easier, I come to the overall column and I look for the properties that are the same. So there are 3 of them that say same, but remember, 27 Good Street is too old. So the
sales result is too old.
Too old, yeah.
Yeah. So we're looking at, just for our listeners that aren't plugging into the spreadsheet, because we might have a couple. You've got a raft of comparable sales. Well, some of them are comparable and some are superior, some are inferior, but all of these sales that you've picked up, bar one, are recent. You know, they're 2021, like from March onwards. And then this one that you've just circled in on, which is a next door property, it's a neighbouring property. It sold in March 2020. And we all know what happened in March 2020. COVID struck. And,
right.
you know, sentiment wasn't the same. FOMO wasn't there. And the market movement has been, you know, well and truly double digit. So it's good that you're pointing that out, because it's potentially the most relevant property, but not the most relevant sale.
Correct, because it is right next door, as you pointed out, Kate. You would think the property that's virtually exactly the same next door would be the best comparable, but not if it sold almost 18 months ago in a very different climate.
Yeah, we can still use it if we think that its sale date was representative and correct at the time. We don't want to use it if it was an anomaly result, but if it was a fair result at the time, and we know how much the market for that product has broadly moved since then, we get tricky, then we overlay market growth.
You can use it as an individual for doing your own assessment, but as a professional licensed valuer, if you're doing the valuation potentially for a bank or someone, their rules may not allow you to use it, which is part of why you're removing it, isn't it, Pete?
Yeah. So our 2 most comparables are 24 Good Street and 25 Good Street. So in simple English, that means the property should be worth somewhere between $700,000 and $800,000. So it does not necessarily mean, though, and this is where I have to tell my students off often, it does not mean that it's worth $750,000, which is exactly halfway between $700,000 and $800,000. So look, generally before I put a value on a property, I would like to physically go and inspect it, but these properties don't actually exist because it's theoretical. But based on the above analysis, I would value the subject property at 770. So it's not 750. So here I'm just valuing based on comparable properties. I haven't used units of measurements, which I'm going to use in the next 2 examples. So someone could value this property at 760, or somebody could value it at 780, and they would still be correct. My first step was to value it more than 24 Good Street, which is $700,000, because it was on a block of land that was 100 square meters larger. So our block's 100 square meters larger. And I figured that this amount of land would be worth more than the extra $50,000. However, it's worth less than 25 Good Street, which is 800, as our subject property does not have a new kitchen and a new bathroom. So somewhere between 700 and 800. And the other thing I used was the big difference between 25 Good Street at 800,000 and ours is the renovation. And I figured in this area, and looking at the renovation online, the reno would have cost somewhere between 20,000 and 40,000. If it's a brand new renovation, if it was done a few years ago, you probably couldn't use that method. So that's using comparable sales. That's how you would value a subject property. So like I said, I came up with the answer of 770. Somebody else might come up with 760. Somebody else might come up with 780. And we would all be correct, because valuation is both an art and a science. You've got to be objective and look at the numbers, but you've also got to be subjective. So there is no one correct answer. However, as I will show you shortly, we can get down to a single figure using units of measurement.
Hey, Pete, how easily can you, and it might be a bit too tricky, but just highlight those key cells, like in a color yellow or something, to just point out to our listeners or the people who actually watch the video. So for example, you can highlight March 2020, 600 in yellow, like that was one of the key delineators. and just to further assist the people who watch the video to see how you've really broken up, the ones you've selected as the most comparable, and then the reasons you removed some of the others. Well, it was this cell was the key reason, that cell was the key reason, etc.
Sure.
Is that possible?
Yeah. For those people looking at the screen now, I've just changed it. So 24 and 25 Good Street are in green because they're the most comparable. And if you have a look at the notes below, I've stated why the properties are not comparable and why the properties are comparable. So hopefully that will make it clearer for everyone.
And Pete, out of interest, how much market growth do you think we've seen in 15 months for this category of product?
Oh, mate. Well, you notice the address, Cate, Gentreville,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, so it's had a turbo boost.
Yeah, so you could superimpose Yarraville or Torrensville on there. So I don't know what property prices have done in Yarraville in the last 18 months, but in Torrensville, which is an inner west gentrifying suburb, I reckon they have gone up 30%.
Well, I was just thinking your figure would need to be 30% for Good Street, and that takes you to 780.
Yeah. And that's for this sort of property. You also made a very good point, Cate. If you're going to look at past properties, sales that maybe were a year old, and you want to work out, well, how much a price has increased. You can't just look at, the median price in this suburb has increased by 10%. So that means that this property's increased by 10%. It doesn't work that way.
No.
Because some properties grow at a faster rate than others. So character homes or period style homes have certainly gone up by 30%. Now, whether 1980s and 90s homes have gone up by the same amount, I don't know.
And what we know in the last year and a bit, anything with 3 bedrooms plus has gone up substantially.
Yeah. So
it's a great pickup by Cate there to look at, actually bring to that point. It's March 2020. How much, which you touched on earlier, how much has the market moved over that period of time? Fortunately, Peter said 30%.
Yeah, I know. He was walking into a booby trap otherwise.
That's right. It married up with the actual valuation Pete gave, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good.
All right.
Well, it's interesting because you talked, Dave, about the fact that old sales can't be used from a banking valuation point of view. And for a certified valuer, maybe they can't use old sales. But for little old me, who's got a client saying, well, what's my budget? What's it worth? What are we going to take to the auction? I can't say, well, we're not using it. It's irrelevant because, there's some red tape reason why it's not allowed to be included. If that's a relevant sale and I can project the growth, it's another piece of data. I will use it.
It's a great example for our listeners, whether and obviously a lot of them will try and do this for themselves. Some of them will work with professionals like Cate and ourselves, or perhaps Peter and valuers. But if they're trying to do it themselves, it can pay to look back at comparables for a year, even 2 years. You've got to, understand how the market's moved over that period of time, which is precisely what we're talking about here. But that doesn't mean an older comparable can't be useful for coming up with a value for a property you're looking to buy today. It's
a great point. We all have access to software, and you don't need to have that access or pay that subscription to get good data. There's good data to be found on the search engines when you check out the sold tab, but it is the bane of my life and a lot of others when you've got undisclosed sales, because you want that sale and then you've got to make a phone call to the agent, beg them for some information. And we do that a lot. But when we look on our search and when we look on our portal, the paid portal, you can rank the sales, within the nearest kilometre, most recent time frame, and so you get a radius.
Land size.
Yeah, and so we filter it, we look
range.
at it. But one thing I always do, instead of just going straight for the most recent data within the 1 kilometre radius in the same suburb, I will also look at the closest data, and that takes away the time filter. But if next door sold 2 years ago and it's very comparable, or if another one in the same street that has the same character and the same land size, same orientation sold 1 year ago, that's a valuable piece of data. So I do 2 searches. I skim it for recent and I skim it for closest.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I mean, we and I would generally sort of look at start out broader and then narrow in, and that includes a longer time frame, and then work out which ones you remove with. But that's obviously the way you do it, Cate. And And yeah, the point is that people can do this for themselves. At the end of the day, they're searching the data, which is what we're describing here. And then there's setting up an Excel spreadsheet, which in essence is, you know, what Peter's just shown everybody there and what we've talked about in a few recent episodes. So some great intel, isn't it, for our listeners to go about this for themselves.
He's just put up something really cool on our screen. Law of diminishing returns. We should stop talking and hand the mic.
So this is part 2 or exercise 2. So we're still in the same suburb. So what I'm trying to show you here is basically just because something is twice as big, it's not worth twice as much. So I've got 7 blocks of land in Gentreville, and they're 300 square meters, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, 900 square meters in size. In the next column is their price. And then what I've done in the next column is price per square meters. It's just the price that it's sold for divided by the size. So if we have a look at the first one, the 300 square meter block sold for 135. Now, if property was double the size and double the price, then we would expect to come down to the 600 square meter block and it would be twice the price, but it's not. So we've gone from 300 square meters sold for 135 and 600 square meters sold for 210, not 270, which would be double. And then we go to the 900 square meter block, which is 3 times the size, and it only sold for 299. Not, let me do the numbers in my head, not 405, as you would expect if it was triple that value. So 2 key points here is, one is we're using the law of diminishing returns, where it means just because something is larger doesn't mean that the price increases at the same proportion. And the other principle I've introduced is the price per square meter, which is going to be very important in the realistic example I'm going to give as my last exercise. So Dave and Kate, do you have any questions, either personally or you think that our listeners, or in this case viewers, would be asking that they obviously can't at the moment?
No, I'm actually pleased you're putting it up, because it's very, very important for people to understand this. I'm often asked with surprise at the price that a small piece of land can command in an area where land is scarce. Let's say, for example, my very own village. You know, recently there was a block of land that sold for a pretty strong price right in the heart of the Yarraville village, and it was literally under 200 square meters of land. And you know, a lot of people raise their eyebrows at that, but the point is the diminishing returns equation. It really does illustrate itself beautifully.
Yeah, look, it's a great part of this episode, that's for sure, Pete, and illustrates it really well for listeners. A question I had is, with the proportion that you've reduced the value per square meter here, obviously that's going to be specific to any given suburb or micro location. Have you tried to mimic any specific suburb in Adelaide to come up with those numbers, or broadly speaking? No,
I was just trying to demonstrate that just because something is, you know, twice as big, it's not worth twice as much. Kate raised a very important point. Like at the moment, 3-bedroom houses, nobody's really interested in 2-bedroom houses. So you can imagine that the value from a 2-bedroom house to a 3-bedroom house, which is 50% bigger, might increase by 50%. But you go from a 3-bedroom house to a 4-bedroom house, which is 33% bigger, the price probably won't increase by 33%. So it's not necessarily a linear relationship. A lot of it relates to what does the market want. And the other one that I haven't mentioned here is, I'm only talking about land size. Land frontage is also very important. Yeah. So we can have 2 blocks of land that are, say, now again, I've got to do the maths in my head, that are let's say 500 square meters in size. If one is 10 meter wide by 50 and the other one is 20 meters wide by 25, in theory, everything else being all equal, the block that is 20 meters wide will probably be worth more, even though they might be right next door to each other and exactly the same size, because it has a better presence to the street. And from a practical point of view, you can fit more on. Like you can have a double garage for a start. So again, I don't want to confuse people too much.
But it's a very detailed concept, and I think this is a great episode to illustrate that it's sort of like the English language. There's all these rules, and then you get, I before E, except after C. That is what valuing is all about.
Yeah.
And to your point about the diminishing returns, Pete, you've just touched on frontage. We've got we haven't even talked about best and highest use. If it's got a whopping big easement running through it, and it's prime for a development except for the easement, that's another scenario. And there's so many combinations that we can discuss. But to flip this on its head, the law of diminishing returns is very true for a single use or a single site block. But once we start talking about development, to add an extra amount of land to an already existing allotment, you can start increasing the value per square metre substantially because the best and highest use is changed. You might be able to fit a driveway or an undercroft, and all of a sudden a project that would take 3 dwellings now takes 20. Well, that's a very different land value then. So there's so many moving parts.
Yeah, that's right. So let's say, if the council says you need a minimum of 300 square metres per dwelling, and we got one block that's 580 square metres and another one that's 610 square metres, there's only 30 square metres difference.
Yeah.
That 30 square metres could mean a big dollar difference because 580 square metres is not even big enough for 2 dwellings.
Yeah.
610 is big enough for 2.
And then pop 580 on a corner site and you get an exemption and crossover. Boom, you've got more land because there's no driveway.
Yeah.
Lots of moving parts.
That's why they're going to go to uni for 3 or 4 years.
No, I think also it's a great point for our listeners of the nuances that sit within pretty much everything, and a reminder for the people who are searching for perfect answers. They don't exist.
Yeah.
Everything's imperfect, and everything to do with property is overlaid with human perception at the end of the day, which is always going to be variable. But obviously, the more knowledge you can have, the more likely you are to come up with an answer that is close to, what the market is going to dictate at the end of the day. So it's a good discussion and a good reminder for people. So I think it's okay to give a bit of complexity to people, Pete.
Well, I mean, like if it was simple, everyone could do it. Like, why would you want to pay a value of $250 to value your property if it was simple? But people say you got to compare apples with apples, but that's pretty hard in property because then there's Johnny, there's Granny Smith apples, there's Red Delicious apples, there's Fuji apples.
There's little blemishes on some apples. There's more blemishes on others.
They're big apples. They're small apples. Like valuing property is like valuing fruit. It's a mixture. We got bananas. We got grapes. We have stuff that comes in season, stuff that's not in season. So that's why it's very hard. So I'd like to get on to the last exercise, which is a real life exercise. So this property is going to auction this Saturday, and this Saturday's the.
Let's set a bet.
Yeah, I'm going to embarrass myself now, like I did last time, and be way off the mark. So it's going to auction on the 26th of June, but you can still do the exercise because what I've got is links to the comparable properties, and then do your own calculations, and then see what the property actually sold for. And what we might do at our next podcast, we'll make a small announcement because I'm going to go to the auction to find out what it actually did sell for.
Unreal. And, to your point, Pete, you didn't get the last one wrong. When you're a valuer or even when you're appraising, you can't guard against someone bidding irrationally. I always say to my clients, this is where I think its market value sits. This is where it could get to based on the information I've sourced with the agent. Here's a price at which you're happy to let it go. I can't tell you that it will definitively land between X and Y. All I can tell you is that you should be prepared to pay between X and Y. If someone wants to go stupid for it, I'm not going to be there in the sidelines saying, get in there and compete. We can't guard against that.
No. And again, if you're looking to buy a property and you're missing out and you feel like you've missed the mark by a fair way, well, you're learning. That's what you're doing.
Yeah.
And once you've purchased, you've won. But if you haven't won, you're just learning. And you use each missed property to upskill yourself to get closer and be a better judge for the next one you go for.
Okay, so for those, and you really should be looking at the video, for those of you that are listening while you're at the gym or driving along. When you get the chance, have a look at the video. So we've got a property, 20 Allen Avenue, Brooklyn Park. Brooklyn Park is a western suburb of Adelaide. It's about 4 or 5 k's from the city and 4 or 5 k's from the beach. So this property is going to auction on Saturday. So I've got a link there so you can check out all the photos. It's basically a corner property, a character house on a corner property on 735 square meters, where you can keep the house and chop off the block. So
it's a really pretty bungalow. It looks like it's a bit aged, needs a bit of love.
Yeah.
I can see the fascias are rotting. It's red brick. It's very characterful, and you can imagine someone getting their hands on this. If they were handy, they'd make it look awesome.
Yeah. So this is going to be in high demand because it's very hard to find a corner property that's sold in the last 3 months for valuation purposes, where you can retain the house and still create another block of land. So there are 4 properties, 13 Lion Street, Brooklyn Park, 11 Thanet Street, Brooklyn Park, which I used in a previous example, 5 Clifford Street, Brooklyn Park, and then 23 Grelina Street, Lockleys. Lockleys is next door to Brooklyn Park, but it's a better suburb. So you can click on those links and check out the houses. And then I've got my justification. So you'll see on the notes, I've got my justification. 13 Lion Street sold for $653 in April this year, but the property is not comparable because it's directly under the flight path. So parts of Brooklyn Park are under the flight path because Brooklyn Park is next door to the airport, but parts of Brooklyn Park are well away from the flight path.
Are we talking like you can see the fuselage and everything? Like,
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Like Tullamarine, living on under Tullamarine.
Yep.
Yeah.
5 Clifford Street, Brooklyn Park sold for $657, so very similar price in May. Land of 582 square meters, 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, corner site with development potential, but it's not a character home. And that, now we start to get to the dollars per square meter. All right, so that sold for $1,130 a square meter. So because I'm looking at development, we can almost ignore the value of the home that's on it. So this is $1,130. 11 Thanet Street sold for $787,500 in March. 676 square meters, 3 bedroom, 1 bath. It is a character home. 1,160 square meters. So very close. First number was 1,130. This is 1,160. 23 Grelina Street, Lockley sold for $965, much more than the others in May. Bigger block of land, 792 square meters. Bigger house, 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, on a corner with subdivision potential, not a character home. That worked out to 1,220 square meters. So the 3 numbers that we have are 1,130, 1,160, and $1,220 per square meter. So just some notes about Clifford Street, and you can read them all in detail when you're having a look at it. But 5 Clifford Street has similar development potential to the subject property, but you've got to knock down the house to do that. Whereas our property, as I said earlier, you can keep the house. So in theory, the property that's going to auction on Saturday, the subject property, should be worth more than $1,300 per square meter.
Yeah.
11 Thanet Street is on the most similar size block to our subject property, and the houses are quite similar because they're both character. The subject property has the development potential to retain the existing dwelling and create another allotment, but this property is inferior because there is no development potential, and this is 1,160. So so far what we've got is our place, the subject property, should be worth more than $1,130 a square meter and 1,160. Then 23 Grelina Street, Lockleys, which is in a better suburb. It's a larger home on a slightly larger block of land. It's not character. It's on a corner allotment, and it has development potential if you knock down the house. Now, this is $1,220 a square meter. Now, I reckon this place is better than our subject property, not because of the development potential, but because of the location. So what I'm saying is, based on those 3 comparables, our property is somewhere between $1,160, $1,220 per square meter. Now, I've seen people try to get really smart and do it mathematically and might work out to $1,864.25 per square metre. We're not going to do that. Remember, valuation is both an art and a science. So we're going to use our subjective opinion here. A square metre rate of somewhere between 11 Thanet Street and 23 Galena Street, Lockleys, is recommended. I'd suggest a rate of $1,200 a square metre, a nice round number. We can't accurately forecast what's going to happen in the future. So $1,200 a square metre, when I multiply it by the land size of 735, it equates to $877,200. But that's not what you're going to put in a valuation report. We're going to round it off. So I'd suggest a value of $880,000 for 20 Allen Avenue, Brooklyn Park.
That's fascinating, Pete, and so thorough. I've got a question about the dwelling, and this is why it's always important to visit a property in person as well. Is there any inherent value, other than the potential to retain a period property, is there any inherent value in that property now, or does it need a significant renovation?
No, it doesn't need a significant renovation. People will pay top dollar because it is a character home.
Yeah, so if someone did get carried away with the idea of owning a character home and doing a development behind it, is there potential for this one to fly, in your opinion?
Yeah. Look, I don't think it should sell for more than the one in Galena Street, Lockleys, which sold for $935. But like I said, I need to go back to uni and study psychology, and in particular, the phenomenon known as fear of missing out. So
yeah, that's right.
Who knows? Because I worked on this for a long time, and there's not one other property that I could see that sold recently. And Kate's giving me the hands up to finish, so I'll be very quick.
I don't want you to finish. I love this one.
There's not one other property that I could find where it had the development potential to keep the house and cut off a block, within 2 or 3 Ks of this place that sold in the last 3 months. So
yeah, so this one has the X factor.
Yeah.
So we're going to take bets. Dave, what do you reckon it'll sell for?
Okay, I'll say, could you just scroll back down to those other prices? I feel like it could, even though technically it shouldn't, it could sort of push towards the Lockleys property value. But look, I'll say, from what you've said and just based on where the market's tracking, I'm going to go bullish. And given what happened with the last auction that we looked at, I'll say 950,000.
Wow. I was going to say 940.
Okay. So our listeners need to tune in next time to find out what this property actually sold for. So thank you very much for Kate and Dave. I hope I didn't bore you and I wasn't too much like a school teacher instructing you what to do, but I think it's very important for our listeners and our viewers to get inside the mind of a valuer and how it really works when they're valuing property.
Absolutely fantastic, Pete. It's been an awesome session.
Great episode, Pete. I think everybody will have learnt a heap and they'll be much better for it when it comes to assessing the value of properties for themselves. So without further ado, we'll move into the gold nuggets.